On today's show, I am pulling back the curtain on something that should never happen in a free country. The U.S. government shut down a fully American-run broadcast outlet, not a foreign outlet, not a social media account, a studio staffed in Miami, staffed by American journalists, producers, and technicians, forced to go dark in a single day. How did it happen? Why was it allowed? And what does it mean for the future of press freedom in the United States? The answers start now. We hear it all the time. Freedom of speech is under attack. Freedom of the press is being threatened. But for most Americans, those warnings, they feel distant, like something that happens all in other countries, under other governments, to other people, until it didn't. In the United States, only one American-run broadcast outlet has ever been fully shut down by the federal government. Not limited, not censored on social media, shut down completely. And the people it happened to weren't foreign actors or anonymous voices behind keyboards. They were American journalists, graduates of American universities, with resumes from respected local stations and even national networks. People who had built careers telling stories, interviewing officials, and reporting the news. Then on September 14th, 2024, everything changed. With the stroke of a pen, Treasury sanctions forced Rebel Media, our small Miami-based studio, off the air instantly, permanently. No warning, no options, no due process. We complied immediately because that's what the law required. But compliance, well, it came with a cost. A team of American producers, editors, engineers, and the on-air talent was told they could no longer do the work for which they had been trained. They could no longer broadcast. They could no longer earn a living. Their voices were simply gone. And here's the part that the American public was never told. You know, Rebel Media wasn't some fringe operation. From a modest studio in South Florida, this team produced 1,100 original broadcasts, reaching an estimated 800 million people across Asia, India, Africa, and South America. Our programming was unapologetically pro-American. It was pro-freedom and committed to honest journalism. We gave a global audience something they weren't getting anywhere else. American perspectives, unfiltered by international gatekeepers. And yes, commentary on issues like President Trump's rising popularity and his strength heading into the 2024 election. Then with the sanctions, it all disappeared. But this isn't just a story about what was taken away. It's also a story about what happened next. Because today, under our new structure, the same journalists, the same producers, the same storytellers are working to relaunch. See, we believed that President Trump's day one executive order promising the restoration of free speech and the end of political censorship would open the door. Today's show isn't just about a studio that went dark. It's about what it means for free speech in America when American journalists can be silenced with a single government action, and what it will take to ensure it never happens again. So to fill in these gaps and bring clarity to what unfolded, the person at the center of this entire battle joins me, Ben Swann, aka my boss and the driving force behind the effort to restore our ability to broadcast. Ben, thanks for joining me on this initial show back.
Great to be here and welcome back.
Okay, so before we get into the details of everything that went on, I think it's essential for the audience to understand who we actually are, not this distorted version that they painted of us. Can you share your professional background and, more importantly, what initially led you into journalism?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, actually, what led me into journalism was trying to support a family. But I've been in broadcast television for over 25 years. I actually started out as a news videographer and photographer and editor, worked my way up the ranks in local news, worked in Texas, worked for Fox, CBS, NBC, worked in Ohio, and then ultimately in Atlanta. That was my last stop before we started all this, and then began working with RT to produce content starting in 2022. under the company, as you mentioned, Rebel Media. We started there, and then we kind of grew from out of that. As you mentioned, 1,100 broadcasts in a very short amount of time, impacting people all around the world. And the best part of this job was actually hiring and bringing in other journalists whose voices had already been censored, who had been silenced by their other employers. Because I'll tell you something, I worked, as I mentioned, CBS, NBC, and Fox. I never worked for any entity that sanctioned me more than those companies did. And that's why I went independent as a journalist for a long time, still an independent journalist as well, but decided to do this company because it gave me a chance to bring other people on board who would have also been censored. And you know all too well what that's like.
Well, we did. We absolutely know that. You know, we understand that this conflict in Ukraine was reshaping global politics. We knew there was issues going on, including here in the United States. In your view, do you think the Biden administration have our company and the nature of our reporting in mind when they were crafting these September 14th sanctions?
Yeah, well, they absolutely did. I mean, we know for a fact they did, because just before the sanctions came down, and essentially what the sanctions did is they said it's illegal for any journalist, any person in the United States to work with RT. And this is significant for a couple of reasons. And one of the reasons that it's so significant, Scottie, is because in the history of this country, there has never been a news outlet or news entity that has ever been sanctioned by the U.S. government. That's a very significant thing. We know that prior to those sanctions coming down, we started hearing through some of the journalists who were here that the State Department and people they had worked with in the past and other news organizations who were now with the State Department, Biden's State Department, were saying, we're watching what you guys are doing. We're aware of what you guys are doing. We know what you're saying. But remember, the Biden administration was the regime of censorship. And it wasn't just for us, and it wasn't just RT. It was also social media. We know that they were putting their fingers into every social media company and directing censorship. We saw it happen during COVID. We saw it happen during the election. We saw it happen kind of across the board. We know that they were censoring broadcast. We know they were censoring social. We know that they were pushing for people to be deplatformed and banned. If Trump had not been elected, we knew our chance to be able to do this work again was gone. And so when he was reelected in November of 2024, we knew there was a chance. That chance has become reality.
Well, you stayed steadfast with it. You know, I want to bring in two colleagues who know this experience probably firsthand. Yep. Manila Chan was our Washington, D.C. correspondent, and Rick Sanchez, who also hosted a show for Rebel Media before the shutdown. Now, both have decades of experience in local and national network news, and both hold formal journalism degrees. So I want to have them a part of this conversation. I want to start with you, Rick, because I have to begin with what everybody kind of notices. We all have studios behind us, but you're not sitting here in our studio. You're joining us from somewhere else. Where are you? Why are you there? And was this ever a part of your professional plan?
Well, as Ben said, when we were shut down, I suppose I could have just sat on the golf course and watched a lot of football and watched a lot of TV. But, you know, I think that what we do is important. I still believe that the ability to share points of view and to have access to things that the American people would otherwise not have access to, those things are important. Not only are they important, they don't belong to Joe Biden. They don't belong to the American government. They don't belong to any government. Those things belong to God. That's intrinsic. That's something that comes from, you know, read the writings of St. Thomas Aquinas, read Law Natural, and you start to understand that some of these things are so important that nobody has the right to take them away from us. And when any government starts to take away something like that from its own people, those things that we call in our Constitution the inalienable rights, somebody's got to stand up against it. And in my little way, for me, it was almost like a protest vote. You know, I decided that, yeah, I could just sit around and wait for somebody to maybe give me permission to do the things that I deserve to do as a human being on this earth. So I said, you know what? If I have to go away and be away from my family, which hurts like hell, by the way. You guys know how much I love Suzanne and the kids. But if I have to go away and if I have to be somewhere else in order to be able to have access, in order to be able to have a point of view that people should hear because they're not being allowed to hear it right now, then that's what I'll do. And I made a decision, and I think it's been a good decision for me because I've grown so much. I've been in Moscow, where I've been based. I've been in Beijing. I've traveled to India. I've traveled to the Middle East, I've been to Istanbul. I've had meetings with Vladimir Putin. I've had meetings with all the heads of state here. I met with officials in China. And I've been able to understand things that we as Americans often don't get a chance to understand. And that's important. That's what we were doing before. That's what I was able to magnify by coming here. And that's what, let me just say once again, no one has a right to take away another person's right to be informed, right to share information, and right to give points of view that they would otherwise not hear. That's why I'm here.
Rick, you know, we went into this industry because we have a passion for telling the truth and telling stories in our industry. And you can hear that passion in your voice, and we've all made sacrifices, but you definitely have had a very trying year and have made the best of the situation that we were forced into. Manila, I want to bring you in on this. From your perspective as a journalist and an employee, was the government, do you feel like, justified in shutting down your employer? And were any of the public accusations about the work we were doing accurate?
One word, Scottie: ridiculous. If you ever bothered to examine any of the stories we've covered, any of the product we ever put out, I dare somebody to call out and say, hey, that is a wrong fact. That's not a fact, or that's fake news. But they can't. All they could have ever done was say Russian propaganda, all because we were doing business with the Russians. But there was nothing wrong with the content that we did, the sources that we had. I mean, it was true journalistic values. And the fact that we are all Americans here on this panel right now, all Americans, they took away our constitutional rights to speech and the right to freedom of the press. And that right there, I mean, when I say they, I'm talking about obviously the Biden administration, because they, as Ben pointed out at the top of the show, they were at the forefront of the big tech censorship push, right? They did everything from, silencing our own individual, shadow banning all of our individual Twitter accounts, our other social media platforms, all the way down to when they figured out that rebel media was a thing and that we were selling content internationally. I thought America was a capitalist country and they wanted small businesses to survive. I guess not under the Biden administration. They decided to take down a small mom and pop journalism shop. So from all aspects of what they claimed were American values, it was just the opposite that we witnessed last year in 2024. So I'm so thrilled to be back on the airwaves with all of you guys.
Well, you have a lot of journalists in America say that they were persecuted and they've been their freedoms have been taken away. We have receipts to show that it happened to us. Ben Swann, Manila Chan, Rick Sanchez, stick around, because when we return, we're going to ask a question every journalist in America should have been asking the moment that our studio actually went dark. We'll break it down right after this. Welcome back. Before the break, we asked the question no one in the press, well, they seemed eager to answer. Why didn't America's newsrooms, conservative or mainstream, speak up when our doors were forced shut? Here's the twist. Not everyone stayed silent. There were a few voices, unexpected ones, who stood up. They spoke out and asked the hard questions the major networks wouldn't even touch. So who defended us, and why did so many others from legacy media, the so-called conservative outlets, look the other way? I want to welcome back in Ben Swann, Manila Chan, and Rick Sanchez. Thanks for joining me on this very important issue. I know we all have passion about it. I know that we could go on for hours on this. Ben, did anybody actually reach out to you, offer support, assistance during the shutdown? And were you surprised by who did or who didn't step forward?
Well, no. Nobody came. That's the fast answer. Nobody came forward to help. Nobody showed any support. Nobody cared because we're, I guess, competition, if you want to call it that. But, when you remain silent when others are having their rights trampled on, then you're just waiting your turn for yours to be trampled on. But here's the reality. Somebody did step forward, and we haven't talked about this part yet, which is that the Trump administration stepped forward. So we actually began a process, Scottie, in the early part of last year, in which we reached out to the Treasury Department, to a particular department within the Treasury called OFAC, the State Department and the White House, and we said, look, we believe that what the Biden administration has done here is a absolute violation of two of our First Amendment rights, the right to free speech and the right to freedom of the press. The Trump administration began working with us at that point to review what we do. They took a look at it, and they came forward in a big way and granted us a license that allows us to work again. They agreed with our position that this censorship that was done by the Biden administration was wrong. It should not have happened. And I will say this, the Trump administration, there are a lot of people who can criticize, I think, Trump the campaigner versus what he's actually done in office. I believe that this administration has been the most pro-free speech administration possibly in modern history. Marco Rubio, who is, as a politician, is someone I've never really been a huge fan of. His State Department, I think, has done an exceptional job, and the positions he's taken, he's done an exceptional job of saying these are the wrong things to do. We have to protect the First Amendment rights of the American people and of journalists. And so, this administration, other people didn't advocate for us. This administration did exactly what they said they were going to do. And I am extremely grateful that they've done that, because they are preserving the rights of Americans to speak. And when you, just like when you violate the rights of Americans to speak, you violate everyone's right. When you preserve the rights for some, you preserve the rights for all. And I'm incredibly grateful to them. They did the right thing.
And that's what it means. That's all that you want. You don't want them to give leniency towards one person or the other. You want them to do the right thing.
That's rule of law.
That's rule of law. And it's not about today. It's also about the future of it.
Right.
Rick, you did go, and we did appear on various shows, but it's not any of us ever took money for it. We were never paid to go on other shows. They didn't bring us on and employ us anywhere. You actually got to go on Tucker Carlson's program. And even though the process to restore our ability to broadcast was already underway, do you think did Tucker offer you any advice or express any sympathy for what had happened? And did he acknowledge that something like this could just as easily happen to even him or any other journalist, depending on who's in the White House?
It's interesting. Yeah, he still does, as a matter of fact. Tucker never is shy on giving advice. In fact, he just gave me some yesterday when he sent me a couple of different texts about things he's working on. But to your point, it really hit a nerve when you were talking about this just a minute ago, Scottie, because one of the first things I did is I turned to the media. I've been in the media all my life. In case people don't know, I worked at CNN, I worked at Fox, I worked at NBC, I worked at Univision. I've been doing media my whole life. So I immediately turned to some of those people, my colleagues and my peers, and they didn't really want to be interested in this story. Anything, they've been trained like the rest of us, including me. I understand them. I forgive them. I used to be in the same boat. I used to think that anybody associated with Russia must be a bad person. If they're associated with Russia, oh my God, right? So I understand that. It's inculcated into a lot of people in the United States, even though it's completely wrong. We're changing now, thank God, by the way. But so I turned to a lot of these folks, and many of them, yeah, thanks. Oh, I feel bad for you, Rick. I feel bad for you, Rick, but I'm not going to do anything. Then I got a newspaper, one of the most conservative newspapers in the United States. They loved the story. They were going to headline it. They couldn't wait to go with it. And then one of their managing editors got a call from somebody in the administrative state, some neocon, unnamed at this point. I think I know who it might be, but I'm not going to use names here because it wouldn't be fair, nor would it be proper journalism. So the story was shut down like hours before it was supposed to air. They called and they said, no, we can't go with the story. Somebody got a call and said that we can't do it. It's like ridiculous. But yeah, Tucker Carlson, there's an interesting story. I used to talk to Tucker from time to time, and I said, Tucker, let me tell you what I'm going through right now, and let me tell you what happened. And he said, come on my show. I want to tell your story. I want to tell your story. So he called me, and we spent a weekend together. I was up at his place. He's not that far away from us in Florida. And I hung out with him, and he totally got it. Because he, like me and like many of us, believe that what we do, again, is based on something that's much bigger than any one of us. It's intrinsic. We have the right to communicate, to be informed. And when I told my story to Tucker, he basically sold it to the world. And in many ways, I think we owe Tucker a debt of gratitude. Not me, all of us who have anything to do with not just Rebel Media, but have anything to do with communicating. Because he was one of the first persons to tell many of these stories, not just my story, the hell with my story, more important stories. He was the first one to tell America, for example, that Ukraine was not winning the war. Sorry, but they're just not. And he was fired for the
Right.
most part, for saying that. So
And
truth matters. Tucker's always stood for it. And when we needed the truth to be told, Tucker was on our side. And I am
and that
grateful
side of
for
it.
it.
Well, that's the thing, Rick. You know, I believe in competition. I understand it's a very competitive industry that we are in. But when your goal is protecting each other and protecting the freedom of speech and freedom of press, everybody should be united in that. Whether they agree with the network or not, I will still go fight for MSNBC to stay on air, CNN. I will fight for every network, conservative, liberal, because it's voices. That voices cannot be silenced. Manila, you actually live. You've lived and worked in Washington, D.C. You've covered this media landscape there for years. You know, we recently saw the Pentagon Press Corps walk out in protest over the new access restrictions. Do you believe that the establishment media functions as kind of this executive club, one that chooses selectively when they want to stand together and when they want to remain silent?
Oh, totally. The mainstream media, of which we have all been excommunicated from and never to return again, for various reasons that we don't have enough time to go into. But you know, when it has become access journalism for years and years and years, and the deterioration of relationships between media outlets. I mean, sure, it might be like, you know, I have a friend at this network or you have a friend at that network. One-on-one, yes, but broadly, we saw that deteriorate over the last 10, 12 years, was it, that Julian Assange was holed up in an Ecuadorian embassy. And all the media outlets used his content. And when it was necessary to step up and protect journalism, the field that we all claim fidelity to, in the embodiment of Julian Assange, all the networks went silent. They all turned on him. They all wanted to see him dragged away to Belmarsh prison. It was bloodlust, hoping to see him rot in prison and film the whole thing, you know, at a court in London. Well, we were one of the few outlets with international reach that was bold enough to stand up for him, to stand up for journalism. But when it was our turn, I wasn't surprised that they didn't step in for us. I wasn't surprised that they continued the access journalism. And it got, you know, so far that it got to the point that they were cheering our censorship.
And also real quick, just also give the Trump administration credit for the fact that they're working new media into those press pools as well, and not allowing mainstream to stay exclusive to it. So kudos for that.
We could go on for the show for an hour. We might do ones in the future because there's so much that went into this year that we need to make sure that people understand what happened so that it doesn't repeat itself in the future. Ben Swann, Manila Chan, Rick Sanchez, thanks for joining me. You know, when the lights went out in our Miami studio on September 13th, it wasn't just a building that went dark. It was a people. It was careers. It was voices. It was a promise we believed America still kept. In those first few hours, as producers were packed gear into boxes and anchors stared at scripts that would never be read on air, there was a moment, a heavy, quiet, emotional moment, where every person in that room not only realized that they had lost their job, their way of earning a living, but they realized that they had been silenced, not by their work, not by the viewers, not by ratings, not by the market, but by their own government for doing their job well. I'm not gonna lie, this leaves a scar. Because when you grow up, as so many of us have, believing America protects free expression, when you earn degrees from American universities that preach journalism as a public trust, when you pour your life into telling stories that serve the public, I never imagined the day would come when I would be told as a broadcaster, I am losing my job, not because I purposely lied to the public, but because I was telling the truth. But here's the truth that Washington and the established media doesn't count on. Silencing people, it doesn't make them disappear. It makes them determined. We complied because the law demanded it. But we never surrendered. We never surrendered our belief, our purpose, that truth is worth telling even when it's inconvenient. And we never surrendered our faith that this country, our country, America, still knows the difference between regulating power and silencing citizens. And so Bikes and Media rises, not because it's easy, not because it's permitted, but because it's necessary. Free speech is not something the government gives us. It is something the government is forbidden to take away. And if American journalists must fight to remind our own nation of that, then that is precisely what we will do. Not with anger, not with bitterness, but with courage, clarity, and the conviction that truth has value, especially when it's almost lost. We are still here. We will speak again. And this time, thanks to the work of President Trump and his administration, the lights stay on.